This is Land of Fabulous, like in Chronicles 28. Righteous King Jotham died at the age of 41, and his son Ahaz reigned. Verse 1. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He didn't do that which was right in Yahweh's eyes, like David his father, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and also made molten images for the Baals. Moreover, he burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burned his children in the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh cast out before the children of Israel. He sacrificed and burned incense in the high places, and on the hills, and under every green tree. Comment in verses 1 and 2, Ahaz didn't do right. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, meaning he rejected Yahweh for idols. From verses 2 to 4, he made images of various foreign gods, put them everywhere, and burned incense to them. He sacrificed to them, even sacrificing his children by fire in the valley of Hinnom, which is on the south side of Jerusalem. In verse 3, he adopted those gods and practices from the surrounding nations, about which Yahweh had said over and over, "Do not adopt their gods." He also said the person who does adopt them, quote, Yahweh will blot out his name from under the sky, Deuteronomy 29:20, because of his waywardness, verse 5. Therefore Yahweh his God delivered him into the hand of the king of Syria. They struck him and carried away from him a great multitude of captives, and brought them to Damascus. He was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who struck him with a great slaughter. For Pekah, son of Remaliah, killed in Judah 120,000 in one day, all of them valiant men, because they had forsaken Yahweh, the God of their fathers. Zikri, a mighty man of Ephraim, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, Azrikam, the ruler of the house, and Elkanah, who was next to the king. The children of Israel carried away captive of their brothers 200,000 women, sons, and daughters, and took also away much plunder from them, and brought the plunder to Samaria. Comment in verses 5 to 8, the king of Samaria, which is Israel, and the king of the Syrians at Damascus were not able to remove Ahaz as king, but they came within a hair of it. It was so bad the Syrians took a multitude of Judeans captive and transported them to Damascus as slaves, which was 100 miles north. In verse 6, the king of Samaria killed 100,000 men of the Judean army in just one day. In verse 8, Israel took 200,000 women and children captive and carried them off, plus plunder. So they stripped Judah to the bone. But here's how close they came to getting Ahaz himself. In verse 6, a certain Israelite named Zikri was able to kill one of the king's sons, plus the official over the king's personal business, plus the second in command next to the king named Elkanah. Since Ahaz was so young, he apparently didn't have any sons old enough to occupy the position next to his. Therefore, this Elkanah was second in command. So because of the dead in his army, the captives, the plunder, and the ongoing threat of further invasion, Ahaz's kingdom was teetering on annihilation, it would seem. He was doing such a poor job that he surely felt at risk of assassination, as happened to his grandfather and great-grandfather. When the army of Israel was marching home with their plunder, including the 200,000 Judean women and children captives, verse 9, but a prophet of Yahweh was there, whose name was Oded, and he went out to meet the army that came to Samaria, and said to them, Behold, because Yahweh, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he's delivered them into your hand, and you've slain them in a rage which has reached up to heaven. Now you intend to degrade the children of Judah and Jerusalem as male and female slaves for yourselves. Aren't there even with you trespasses of your own against Yahweh your God? Now hear me, therefore, and send back the captives that you've taken from your brothers, for the fierce wrath of Yahweh is on you. Then some of the heads of the children of Ephraim, Azariah the son of Johanan, Berechiah the son of Meshillemoth, Jehizkiah the son of Shallum, and Amasa the son of Hadlai, stood up against those who came from the war, and said to them, You must not bring in the captives here, for you intend that which will bring on us trespass against Yahweh, to add to our sins and to our guilt. For our guilt is great, and there is fierce wrath against Israel. So the armed men left the captives and the plunder before the princes and all the assembly. The men who have been mentioned by name rose up and took the captives, and with the plunder clothed all who were naked among them, dressed them, gave them sandals, and gave them something to eat and drink, anointed them, carried all the feeble of them on donkeys, and brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, to their brothers. Then they returned to Samaria. Comment: in verse 9, there was a prophet of Yahweh in Samaria named Oded. In verse 11, he said Yahweh's wrath was on them because they took captives from Judah and Jerusalem. This was according to the heart of Yahweh and the law of Moses in Leviticus 25:39 that Israelites should not enslave their brother Israelites. In verses 12 and 13, Israel would probably have ignored Oded, but some leading men of Samaria stood up and supported him. Verse 12 honors the four of them by listing their names. They had the guts to confront the whole army. They reinforced what the prophet said with convincing argument. They took charge of the 200,000 captives, some of them too weak to walk any further, and very gently returned them to Jericho. We presume the captives were able to make their way home from there, but many of their husbands and fathers were no doubt dead from combat. Coming up, the first mention in 2 Chronicles of a new mega-kingdom. It arose over 800 miles away in Mesopotamia and has been sweeping its way across the Middle East toward the Mediterranean, toward Syria, toward Israel, toward Judah. Verse 16. At that time King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria to help him, for again the Edomites had come and struck Judah and carried away captives. The Philistines also had invaded the cities of the lowland and of the south of Judah, and had taken Beth-Shemesh, Ajalon, Gederoth, Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and also Gimzo and its villages, and they lived there. For Yahweh brought Judah low because of Ahaz, king of Israel, because he acted without restraint in Judah and trespassed severely against Yahweh. Comment: in verse 18, there's yet more trouble for Ahaz. The Philistines have captured the entire foothills region, plus the south of Judah, and are living there. And the Edomites have taken captives. So there's an unimaginable amount of pain and suffering because in verse 19, quote, Judah trespassed severely against Yahweh, end quote. But that's what he so clearly promised them in Leviticus 26 if they would forsake him. In verse 16, mention of Assyria, the new mega-kingdom. We know from secular and biblical history that they've been gobbling up everything in their path coming west. Ahaz wants them to come a little further and gobble Syria and Israel, plus support him against the Philistines and Edomites. After Ahaz called on Assyria, verse 20, Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria, came to him and gave him trouble, but didn't strengthen him. For Ahaz took away a portion out of Yahweh's house and out of the house of the king and of the princes, and gave it to the king of Assyria, but it didn't help him. Comment: we can supplement verse 20 with details from 2 Kings 16. King of Judah, Ahaz, sent silver and gold to Tilgath-Pilneser, king of the Assyrian mega-kingdom. Ahaz vowed to be Tilgath-Pilneser's servant and requested help against his local enemies, namely against the Syrians in Damascus and against Israel. The Assyrian king came. He overthrew Damascus, killed their king, and carried away the people captive. But on balance, Tilgath-Pilneser gave Ahaz more trouble than help, as we just read in verse 20. Remembering verse 5 that we read at the start of the chapter, we know that a multitude of Judean captives were being kept in Damascus as servants. So when Tilgath-Pilneser took Damascus captive, it was the second captivity for the Judeans who were being held there. In verse 21, the payment to the king of Assyria came out of Ahaz's own wealth, the wealth of the leading men, and out of the treasury of Yahweh's house. Verse 22, in the time of his distress he trespassed yet more against Yahweh, this same King Ahaz, for he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which struck him. He said, because the gods of the kings of Syria helped them, so I will sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. Ahaz gathered together the vessels of God's house and cut the vessels of God's house in pieces, and shut up the doors of Yahweh's house, and he made himself altars in every corner of Jerusalem. And every city of Judah he made high places to burn incense to other gods, and provoked Yahweh, the God of his fathers, to anger. Now the rest of his acts and all his ways, first and last, behold, they're written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city, even in Jerusalem, because they didn't bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel, and Hezekiah his son reigned in his place. Comment in verse 23, Ahaz sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which struck him, meaning he lost the war against Damascus, so he thought since the gods of Damascus were stronger than Yahweh, he should sacrifice to them. But the real story's in verse 5 above, that it didn't have anything to do with the gods of Damascus. It was because Yahweh handed him what he deserved. In verses 24 and 25, Ahaz made altars and places of worship to idols in every corner of Jerusalem and in every city of Judah, and further he shut down the temple. He, quote, shut up the doors of Yahweh's house, end quote. Thus he made service to Yahweh illegal, unless it was in some form outside the temple, of which Yahweh disapproved. In verses 26 and 27, Ahaz died and was buried, but not in the tombs of the kings, and Hezekiah his son reigned in his place. There's more about Ahaz in 2 Kings 16 and Isaiah 7. Isaiah delivered the well-known prophecy about the virgin birth to Ahaz. It happened like this. When Ahaz was trembling about the kings of Israel and Syria coming in, killing him, and installing another king, Isaiah came to him and said, "Don't be afraid, turn to Yahweh, He'll support you. Since you don't have any confidence in Yahweh, Yahweh says, ask for any sign you want and He'll give it to you." To which Ahaz replied, "I wouldn't put Yahweh to the test, that wouldn't be right." To which Isaiah replied, quote, "Therefore the Lord Himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." End quote. The virgin birth of Christ wouldn't be for another 800 or so years. Therefore Ahaz didn't see it in the flesh. If it had occurred during his time, of course he wouldn't have believed it. But since the virgin birth was a sign for Ahaz, quote, "The Lord Himself will give you a sign," end quote, he would see it or know it in the afterlife, but then it would be too late. He rejected a sign when he was alive, so God gave it to him later. God shows us all the signs we need, assuming we don't reject them. For us, we know there was a virgin birth only by the Holy Spirit because there's no earthly way to prove it. There were no earthly witnesses but Mary, but in the afterlife everyone will know it. 2 Chronicles 29 is next.